All right, I was 7 months pregnant with my 7th child when I got a text message that changed my life. Now, you did hear me correctly. I did say 7 months, and I was pregnant with my 7th child. It takes 2 hands to say that many kids. Now, the text message was super simple, and it was several years ago, so it didn't have a hyperlink, there was no funny meme, and there wasn't a video for me to watch. It was just a few words sent from my loving husband, and it simply said, "Hey, hun, when I get home, we need to talk." I can picture exactly where I was when I read that message. Sitting at the kitchen table, at my laptop, paying a bunch of bills. I closed the computer, slid off my chair to my knees, and knew exactly what he needed to talk about. And so rather than belaboring the point, I texted him back with 2 quick questions. Trying. So I got this text message and it simply read, "Hey, hun, when I get home, we need to talk." I texted him back with 2 simple questions. Where are you going and for how long? The answer to the first question was Afghanistan, and the answer to the second was for a period of no more than 400 days. You see, that's Army speak. My husband was a proud soldier in the Army National Guard, and this would be his 4th combat deployment. When they take you away from your family for a year, they don't just say a year, because it takes some time to get ready and it takes some time to get back. So the way they write 1 year on paper is for a period of no more than 400 days. By this point, I'd known this man well enough that when he started a sentence with, "Hey, hun, we need to talk," I knew something big was coming. Now, I don't know about you, but in that moment, it was as if I had relived several other moments in my life. But that singular moment was connected like a spider web to other turning points where the light had switched on and I'd probably dropped to my knees. One of those first moments I remember that was similar to that was when we were very first dating. We'd been set up on a horrible blind date and we decided to give it a second chance. As he was talking and we were getting to know each other, he mentioned that he dreamed of joining the Army. This was right after 9/11, a time when our country had come together with unity, with a cry for justice and liberty and freedom around the world. He and 5 of his brothers ended up enlisting in the National Guard, all as proud soldiers. And when he told me in that moment that he wanted to join the Army someday, I remember my stomach hitting the floor. And then quickly asking myself, why in the world did I care what this kid wanted to do with his future? We hardly knew each other. And yet that moment led to another moment a couple of years later. He'd enlisted in the Army, we'd become engaged, we'd gotten married. He'd been gone almost our entire first year of marriage to basic training and advanced individual training for the Army. He'd finally come home. We'd bought our first home. We were expecting our first baby. And I got a phone call where I was a teacher at the high school. This time it wasn't a text, it was a phone call on a landline in my classroom where he said, "Hey, hun, when you get home, we need to talk." I remembered in that moment, the first moment of him preparing to deploy to a combat zone, something he'd wanted to do since the day 9/11 happened and really for the first 23 years of his life. Something we'd agreed upon, loving this country, loving freedom and everything she stood for. And yet in the moment, being pregnant with an unborn baby, asking myself if this is really what we'd signed up for. And so we came home and we talked. I remembered a couple of years later when he called once again, though I had a cell phone. He wasn't calling from home and I wasn't at work. Instead, I was the one in the house with 2 little babies, and he was in Iraq, calling toward the end of a period of no more than 400 days. Because that first combat deployment of his was finally coming to an end, and the other families and I were planning a homecoming party like none other. I had no idea that day when he called to say, "Hey, hun, we need to talk." It was to let me know that he wasn't coming home quite yet. And then that first combat deployment was going to turn into 2 consecutive tours of duty. And then he'd be extending beyond that 400-day mark for yet another assignment. Now, I can fast forward and assure you that not every time my husband called or texted and said, "Hey, hun, we need to talk," did it involve war. Because sometimes it involved really peaceful things like politics and campaigns. Such as the time when I wasn't pregnant with the 7th child at 7 months, but I was actually at least 9.5 months pregnant in the month of July in Utah. Raise your hand if you've been there because it's hot. This time it was only our 3rd baby. And Brent didn't call or text, but he actually came home from a night class at the University of Utah where he was getting a master's degree. And he said, "Hey, hon, we need to talk." At that point, it was about his decision to run for city council, which led to 4 years of service there, including 1 year that he took off from the city council to deploy yet again on his 3rd combat deployment. When he came home from that 3rd deployment, we had 4 little kids. I was then pregnant with the 5th. And before you knew it, it was him and me holding hands together because he and I needed to talk, not to each other, but to an entire room full of residents of the city of North Ogden as we officially launched his campaign to run for mayor. Literally the exact same day I brought our 5th baby home from the hospital. Which leads me again to that day when I was 7 months pregnant with our 7th baby. And he said, "Hey, hon, we need to talk." Within 7 weeks, I had given birth to that baby. Within a few more weeks, it was Thanksgiving, followed by Christmas, and then he was on his merry way. This time in January of 2018, it was me saying, "Hey, hon, we need to talk." And I asked him one question. "Are you coming back?" Now, if you ever knew Brent Taylor, you knew the man was never wrong, and he never hesitated before speaking when he knew he was right. And so with those sparkling blue know-it-all eyes and that Cheshire cat grin, he looked right at me and said, "Yes, I'm sure of it. I'm coming back." And I, being the type A, overwhelmed, brand new mother of 7 that I am, looked straight at him and said, "Well, that's a very good thing because I promise you I can't do this without you. There is no way I can raise a 2-month-old, a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old and tell them where their father went and why he didn't make it back, let alone explain to an entire city why you would set down your position as mayor to go serve overseas in a land I'll never visit for a people I'll never know. So it's a good thing you're coming back because there's no way I can survive without you." And then there came a moment when someone knocked on my door and they didn't call me hun, but they did say, "We need to talk." In this case, it was 2 Army officers in full dress uniform to let me know that my husband, Major Brent Taylor, had been killed in action outside of Kabul in an insider attack on a Saturday morning hike. And it was in that moment that I relived every single one of those moments, particularly the moment when he said, "Yes, I'm coming back." And I said, "I cannot survive without you." Because in that very moment, I realized we had both been wrong. Thank you.